They say every military base has its own rhythm, a heartbeat made of generators humming, boots crunching over gravel, and the soft clang of tools long before dawn. At Fort Silas, that rhythm always began with the smell of coffee.
Tourniquets applied.
By 4
He's losing
a.m.,
too much blood.
when most of Colorado's Sierra Nevada was still asleep under frost and fog, a single light burned in the motor bay. It belonged to Evelyn Harper. No one really knew where she came from. The form said, civilian contractor, mechanical maintenance, and that was enough for the paperwork people. To the young recruits, she was just the coffee lady, the 50-something woman with quiet eyes, the color of steel, and hands that looked too worn to lift a wrench. But every bolt she tightened stayed tight. Every engine she touched roared smoother afterward. Even the colonel's Jeep seemed to run better after her tune-ups. That morning, the air tasted of snow and oil. Evelyn moved through the bay with the precision of someone who'd rehearsed the same steps for years. Pour grounds, measure water, check the torque gauge, adjust the welding arc. The tasks were small, almost sacred. They kept her mind from drifting back to sandier places and darker nights she never talked about. "Morning, Grandma," Sergeant Jack Monroe called out as he swaggered in, big grin already loaded. Behind him followed his SEAL team, Caleb Rivers, with his phone half raised for footage, Owen Price nursing a half-healed bruise, and Liam Cho scrolling through comm frequencies. The bay filled with laughter that bounced off the steel walls. Jack pretended to trip, bumping the edge of the table. The mug spilled, coffee pooling across the metal. "Oops, guess these old hands ain't what they used to be." Caleb caught it on video. The others chuckled. Evelyn just reached for a rag, wiping slowly, face unreadable. "Maybe focus on your briefing, Sergeant," she murmured. Her voice carried no anger, only fatigue the kind soldiers recognize but rarely name. Chief Marlene Quinn watched from the doorway. She had seen that posture before, spine straight even when humiliated, eyes calculating distances while pretending not to see. It belonged to warriors who'd once held scopes instead of wrenches. By breakfast, the story had already spread through the mess hall. The old lady in maintenance, the coffee spill, the clip that Caleb posted to his private feed. 200 likes before the eggs even cooled. At the far table, Colonel Thomas Beckett kept reading the daily intel reports, pretending not to hear the laughter. Only Tom Riley, the cook, noticed Evelyn eating alone, back to the wall, gaze fixed somewhere far beyond the mountains. Later that morning, as a storm front rolled over the peaks, Captain Fiona Drake from Intelligence stopped by the motor bay. "Evelyn," she said, eyes sharp, "you were checking the weather radar yesterday. You see anything odd?" The older woman wiped her hands on a rag. "Wind's wrong for a cold front. It'll tunnel through the valley by 1600 hours. Radio might drop." Drake raised an eyebrow. That was not the kind of detail a maintenance worker usually knew. Before she could ask more, the alarm klaxon shattered the calm patrol convoy under fire, Iron Ridge sector. In the command center, chaos erupted. 8 SEALs trapped. No sniper support within range. Helicopters 45 minutes out. On the screens, red icons blinked like dying stars. Colonel Beckett slammed his fist on the table. From the shadows near the doorway, Evelyn stood motionless, eyes fixed on the map. Grid 447, elevation 1,200 meters, a perfect overwatch nobody had noticed. She turned quietly, slipping into the corridor while everyone shouted for air support. No one saw her leave. Only a half-cleaned coffee mug remained on the workbench, steam curling upward like a silent promise that something was about to change. Snow began falling by the time Evelyn reached the perimeter fence. It wasn't the soft kind that settles gently on your coat. It was hard, sharp flakes that bit at your skin and vanished before you could feel the sting. She moved fast, slipping past the gate guard with a nod. Nobody questioned the coffee lady carrying a small toolbox. Nobody ever did. Beyond the floodlights, the world narrowed into shades of gray and white. The wind roared down from the Sierra peaks, dragging the smell of ozone and iron. Evelyn's breath came in visible bursts, each one reminding her how thin the mountain air was. She followed the maintenance trail she'd memorized months ago, boots silent against frozen gravel. Every muscle in her body remembered these movements, even if she wished it didn't. Back inside the command center, Colonel Beckett was barking orders. "Where's our QRF?" he demanded. 30 minutes, sir, Captain Drake replied, voice tight. On the monitor, The drone feed flickered 8 green dots surrounded by red ones. "They're boxed in at grid 447, Drake said. "Visibility almost 0. Chief Quinn stepped closer to the screen. "That ridge," she murmured. "There's a shooting angle there if someone could reach it." But when she turned, the shadow near the doorway was gone. Evelyn climbed steadily, the mountain a jagged silhouette against the storm. Her knees screamed at every step, the old injury in her leg pulsing with heat. She ignored it. Pain was an old friend. She reached the overlook ridge 447 and dropped to one knee. The storm howled across her face, tugging at the faded patch on her jacket, a raven's wing almost erased by time. She opened the toolbox. Beneath the wrenches and rags lay the rifle Remington 700, matte black, custom modded, a weapon that officially didn't exist. She'd rebuilt it herself, piece by piece, hand-filed the bolt, balanced the trigger, carved tiny initials on the stock. W.B. Widow's breath. From a small pouch she withdrew 18 rounds, each one hand-loaded, measured, perfect. She lay prone, adjusting her scope. The digital rangefinder was long gone. She didn't need it. Wind 15 knots northwest. Distance 1,200 meters. Elevation drop 300. Air pressure 620. Her mind did the math like breathing. Down below, muzzle flashes burst through the snow like fireflies trapped in fog. "Contact! Contact!" Jack Monroe's voice crackled through the radio net. "We're pinned on both sides. Need eyes on that ridge." Nobody answered. Only static and the scream of wind. Evelyn exhaled, counting silently. 4 in, 7 hold, 8 out. She squeezed the trigger at the pause between heartbeats. The rifle kicked gently. Through the scope, a figure in dark robes collapsed, his RPG tumbling harmlessly into the rocks. She worked the bolt, chambered the next round, fired again. 14 seconds later, another gunner fell. In the command center, the drone operator leaned closer to the screen. "Sir, new heat signature ridgeline north. Single shooter." Colonel Beckett frowned. "Whose?" "Ours, I think. They're hitting enemy command elements one by one." On the ground, Monroe's team noticed it too. The rain of bullets eased. "Whoever's up there, keep doing it," Monroe yelled, shoving a new magazine into his rifle. Owen Price dragged a wounded man behind the Humvee. "It's surgical," he whispered. "They're clearing the field like a machine." Back on the ridge, Evelyn kept her rhythm. Breathe in, hold, exhale, fire. The world shrank to the size of her crosshairs. Leadership first, machine guns next, then anyone coordinating radio traffic. The enemy line unraveled, discipline collapsing into panic. They fired wildly into the storm, chasing ghosts. By the 12th shot, her hands trembled, the old nerve damage flaring. She paused, flexed her fingers, then steadied the scope against a rock. Through the swirling snow, she saw Jack Monroe hauling one of his men to cover. For a second, the image blurred with another memory. A young soldier in a different desert, calling for help that never came. She blinked hard, refocused, took aim at the man lining up behind Monroe. One breath, one trigger pull. The target dropped. "Sir," the drone operator said, voice shaking, "the shooter's pattern, it's identical to Delta Doctrine. 14-second rhythm." Captain Drake's heart jumped. "That's Raven 9's signature." Colonel Beckett turned toward her sharply. "Raven 9 died 3 years ago." "Missing, sir," Drake replied, eyes on the screen. "Never confirmed dead." Outside, Evelyn chambered her 18th and final round. Only one enemy remained, a boy, barely 20, crawling toward the valley's edge. She lowered the scope. Sometimes mercy was the truest shot. The rifle stayed silent. The boy vanished into the snow. She began to collect her brass, one by one, each still warm from battle. 18 spent shells, lined in perfect order. Old habits, old ghosts. When she reached the last casing, she hesitated, left it there on the ridge, gleaming faintly under the storm's dim light, a marker for anyone who might come looking for the shadow who saved them. Below, the helicopters finally arrived, rotors chopping through cloud, lights sweeping the valley. From above, the drones caught the final image, a single figure shouldering a rifle, turning away from the battlefield, disappearing into the blizzard as if the mountain itself had swallowed her whole. Back at Fort Silas, no one noticed that the coffee machine was still on, or that 2 cups waited side by side, steam rising into the empty air. By the time the rescue helicopters touched down on the landing pad, Fort Silas had gone from organized chaos to stunned silence. The storm was breaking, leaving behind a thin veil of fog that clung to the hangars and antenna towers. The base smelled of cold metal and gunpowder, the way all aftermaths do, sharp, sterile, and too quiet. Colonel Thomas Beckett stood in the command center staring at the live drone feed one last time. The camera panned slowly across Iron Ridge, rows of bodies cooling in the snow, the wrecked Humvees smoking gently. And there, half buried in slush, a small line of brass casings arranged neatly like prayer beads. 18 in total, spaced exactly 14 seconds apart by timestamp. Whoever had been up there wasn't guessing. They were working muscle memory, not luck. "Get me a full thermal scan of that ridge," Beckett ordered, "every inch." "Already done, sir," replied the drone operator, voice still trembling. "Single signature, no heat trace now. Whoever it was, they're gone." Captain Fiona Drake entered the room, a tablet clutched tight in her gloved hand. "Sir," she said quietly, "you should see this." She placed it on the table. It displayed a partially redacted personnel file. Across the top, in faded black ink, were the words, "Operation Widow's Breath." The attached image was grainy, 6 soldiers posing in front of a Humvee in the desert. One of them, the smallest figure at the end, held a Barrett rifle, almost as tall as she was, green-gray eyes. Same shape, same quiet stare. "Raven 9, Drake said. "Delta Force. Declared Maye, Fallujah, 2014. Only survivor of the Widow's Breath unit." Beckett exhaled slowly. "That's not possible." "It's not only possible," Drake replied. "It's probable. Sir, the pattern of fire, 14 seconds per shot, it's identical. There's only one person on record who ever used that breathing sequence. Chief Marlene Quinn, who had been standing near the monitors, turned. She's here, isn't she?" Drake hesitated. "If you're suggesting—" "I'm not suggesting," Quinn cut in. "I've seen her hands. Scar tissue on the knuckles from bolt-action recoil. No tremor until she lifts something heavy. That's muscle trained for sniper control, not welding." The room went still. Even the drone operator stopped typing. Beckett's jaw tightened. "You're telling me the woman fixing our trucks just took out 40 insurgents and saved my SEAL team?" "Yes, sir," Quinn said simply. "That's exactly what I'm saying." Outside, the snow was melting into thin rivers that ran along the concrete. Evelyn Harper limped through the maintenance yard, a duffel slung over her shoulder. Her hair was wet, her clothes streaked with soot. Anyone seeing her might have assumed she'd been working generators again. She reached her workshop, hung the faded jacket on its hook, and rolled up her sleeves. The rifle was already stripped down on the bench. She cleaned it piece by piece, moving with a calm too steady to be ordinary. Each motion was a ritual: wipe, oil, assemble, breathe. When she was done, she placed 17 brass casings in a small wooden box and locked it. The 18th, she set aside, polishing it gently with her thumb before slipping it into her pocket. At 6:40, the motor bay door opened. The sound of boots echoed in the corridor. Jack Monroe, still in combat gear, flanked by Caleb Rivers and Owen Price. His uniform was torn, his knuckles raw from the fight. He stopped when he saw her. Evelyn looked up, face unreadable behind her welding mask. "Morning, Sergeant. You're up early." Jack's throat tightened. "We saw someone on the ridge." She didn't answer, just reached for her wrench and continued tightening a bolt. "You saved us," he said finally, voice low. 18 shots, 18 hits. Who are you?" She set the wrench down, lifted the mask. For a long moment, the two simply looked at each other, the young soldier who had mocked her that morning and the woman whose silence had just rewritten his definition of courage. Then she reached into her pocket and placed a brass casing on the workbench. It clicked softly against the metal. "Just someone who believes heroes come in all forms," she said. The door swung open again. Colonel Beckett and Captain Drake entered, followed by Chief Quinn. Beckett's face was stone. "Miss Harper," he said, "we need to speak privately." Evelyn nodded, removed her gloves, and wiped her hands. "Of course, Colonel." In Beckett's office, the blinds were half closed, throwing slanted bars of sunlight across the walls. The colonel opened a red file folder and slid it toward her. "Operation Widow's Breath," he said. "Ring a bell?" Evelyn's eyes flickered, but her tone stayed level. "I fix vehicles, Colonel. I make coffee. I'm not sure what you're asking." "You're Raven 9, Drake said. You disappeared after Fallujah. You were declared MIA. Evelyn smiled faintly. MIA means missing, doesn't it? Not confirmed dead. Sometimes it's easier to let the world think you're gone. Beckett studied her, his face hard, but his voice quieter now. My son was in that operation. Lieutenant Ethan Beckett. You were his overwatch. She froze, the composure cracking for the first time. He was brave, she whispered. He didn't suffer. I made sure of that. Beckett closed his eyes for a moment, then nodded slowly. Then I owe you a debt I can never repay. Drake set another document on the desk. We also found transmissions frequency, 47.9 megahertzes. Inside job, feeding coordinates to enemy forces. Whoever ambushed Monroe's team knew their exact route. Evelyn straightened. Check the motor pool personnel. There's been running unauthorized diagnostics during off hours. Beckett frowned. How would you know that? Because I was watching, she said. Old habits. Beckett leaned back, exhaling. You understand this puts you in violation of at least a dozen regulations. I understand, she said, standing. But I also understand those men are alive because of what I did. Quinn stepped forward then, placing a weathered hand on Beckett's shoulder. Sir, regulations didn't save that team. She did. The colonel's eyes softened, just barely. Very well, but this conversation stays in this room. Evelyn nodded, pulled her jacket back on. The raven emblem caught the light, clear now for the first time. At the door, she paused. Colonel, she said quietly, you can keep calling me Miss Harper. Raven 9 died a long time ago. She left the office, walking back into the cold morning, where the sun was just beginning to rise over Iron Ridge. The mountain glowed pale gold, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself a breath that didn't taste of guilt. Inside, Beckett looked down at the open file again, at the note scribbled in the margin of the last page. If she ever resurfaces, trust her instincts. They'll save more lives than any protocol. The next morning at Fort Silas, the snow had crusted into thin sheets of ice. Soldiers scraped windshields, their breath hanging in the air like smoke, and somewhere in the motor bay, an acetylene torch hissed to life. Evelyn Harper was back at work. She always was. Nothing about her face or her movements betrayed the events of the night before. To anyone passing by, she was just the same quiet woman who welded cracked frames and brewed the strongest coffee on base. But inside the command center, a storm of another kind was brewing. Captain Fiona Drake stood before a wall of screens filled with code streams and frequency charts. The leak came from our own system, she said grimly. Every time a patrol was hit, there was an encrypted burst on 47.9 megahertz, exactly 15 minutes earlier. Colonel Beckett folded his arms. And your suspect? Drake hesitated. It's coming from a terminal in the motor pool. The access key belongs to Corporal Tyler Briggs. Beckett's jaw tightened. Briggs had been one of the most reliable logistics men, quiet, obedient, forgettable. Bring him in, Beckett said. Down in the motor bay, Evelyn heard the footsteps before she saw them. Chief Marlene Quinn entered first, followed by Jack Monroe. Eve, Quinn said softly, we need your eyes on something. She handed over a small black device, half burned, half melted. We found this hidden behind one of the fuel drums. Recognize it? Evelyn turned it over in her palm. A microtransmitter, military issue but altered. Whoever did this knew our systems, she said. This isn't amateur work. Monroe crossed his arms. Briggs used to handle comms before he got transferred to logistics. Guess old habits die hard. Evelyn looked at him, the faintest ghost of a smile playing on her lips. You'd be surprised what old habits can do. Within an hour, Briggs was sitting in interrogation, sweat beading on his forehead. Captain Drake ran the questioning while Beckett observed through the glass. Briggs denied everything until she played back the intercepted transmissions, his voice filtered through static. His composure cracked like thin ice. They had my sister, he whispered. Said they'd kill her if I didn't give them patrol routes. I thought it was just coordinates, just data. I didn't know they'd use it to set traps. Beckett's expression didn't change. You sold lives for data. I didn't mean to, Briggs cried. They said she'd be safe. Drake shut off the recorder. She's already dead, Corporal. We intercepted the message. They never planned to keep their word. Later, in the mess hall, the news spread in whispers. A mole inside the base. Betrayal closer than anyone imagined. Monroe sat at a corner table, staring at his untouched tray. We all mocked her, he said quietly. And she was the one protecting us. Owen Price nodded. Makes you think who else you never notice. Oh. Outside, Evelyn stood alone by the loading dock, watching the mountains fade into mist. Colonel Beckett approached, his breath a pale cloud in the cold air. You were right, he said simply. It was Briggs. She didn't turn. I saw the signs. Too many maintenance requests. Wrong timing. You learn patterns. He studied her profile, the sharp line of her jaw, the small tremor in her left hand. You never stop learning, do you? Not if you want to stay alive, she said softly. There was silence for a while, filled only by the distant hum of generators. Then Beckett said, My son used to talk about you. Not by name, just a sniper who kept him alive longer than he deserved. He wrote about you in his last letter home. He held out a folded piece of paper, yellowed at the edges. Evelyn hesitated before taking it. The handwriting was young, rushed, full of hope. If I don't make it back, tell the woman on the ridge she's the reason I kept fighting. Her fingers tightened around the page. He was brave, she said, voice barely audible. So are you, Beckett replied. But I need to know something. Why come here? Why hide in my base of all places? Evelyn met his eyes. Because I needed to remember what normal looked like. Engines braking instead of people. Fixing instead of killing. That night, Chief Quinn found her still working in the bay long after curfew. Sparks flared from the welder, painting her face in flashes of orange light. You don't have to carry it alone, Quinn said gently. Evelyn kept welding. I've carried worse. You know they'll come for you now, Quinn warned. After what you did, after what you found. Evelyn shut off the torch. Then let them. Her voice was calm, steady, final. At 2,300 hours, a blackout hit the West Wing. Every light flickered, then died. Beckett's radio crackled with static. Security breach Sector 6. The words had barely left the speaker when gunfire erupted outside the motor bay. Evelyn moved before thinking, pulling Monroe down just as glass exploded inward. Muzzle flashes cut through the dark. She rolled behind a tool chest, drew a Glock from under the bench, one she wasn't supposed to have, and fired 3 times. The shooting stopped. When the emergency lights kicked in, red glow washed over the scene. 2 bodies lay near the doorway, mercenaries in U.S. fatigues, badges stripped. Evelyn approached one, checked the weapon. Not Taliban, she said. Contractors. Drake arrived seconds later, breathless. We traced encrypted funds moving through Briggs's accounts. He wasn't working alone. Someone higher up hired outside help to clean up the evidence. Beckett looked around at the bullet holes, the smell of burned cordite. We're sitting on a damn nest of snakes. Evelyn holstered the pistol, her eyes flat. Then we smoked them out. The investigation consumed the next 48 hours. Evelyn barely slept. She pored over communication logs, pattern charts, shipment records. She wasn't just fixing vehicles anymore, she was rebuilding trust one clue at a time. When she finally emerged from the bay, dawn was bleeding over the ridge. The air was cold and pure, untouched. Jack Monroe found her there, hands deep in her jacket pockets, staring toward the rising Sunday. You ever going to tell us who you really are? He asked. She smiled faintly. Does it matter? It does to me, he said, because I need to know what kind of person would walk through a blizzard to save people who laughed at her. She looked at him for a long moment, the kind that says more than words, the kind who's tired of burying friends. Monroe didn't know how to answer that. He just stood beside her, silent, both of them watching the first rays of gold stretch across Iron Ridge. The mountain looked peaceful now, but the scars remained just like the ones neither of them could see. Behind them, the base began to stir. Engines rumbled to life, soldiers shouted morning greetings, and the smell of coffee drifted once again from the motor bay. Only this time, it wasn't just caffeine warming the air, it was respect. Quiet, earned, and finally given. 2 days after the attack, Fort Silas didn't feel like the same place anymore. The laughter in the mess hall had turned into whispers. Guards walked in pairs now, scanning rooftops and corners that used to feel safe. Somewhere in the command building, printers spat out encrypted reports 24 hours a day. There was no denying it, someone far above Corporal Briggs had been pulling the strings. Colonel Thomas Beckett hadn't slept in 30 hours. He stood at the operations table, hands gripping the edges so tightly his knuckles turned white. The funding trail ends in D.C., Captain Fiona Drake said quietly, sliding a folder toward him. Private defense contractor, shell company, Same network that funded the Widow's Breath mission 9 years ago. Beckett's eyes darkened. You're telling me they're still running it? Or trying to erase anyone who remembers it? Drake replied. Starting with her. He looked through the glass wall toward the motor bay. Evelyn Harper was there again, welding, as if nothing had changed. Sparks reflected off her safety goggles, turning her eyes into two small suns. To everyone else, she was just keeping the base running. But Beckett knew what he was really seeing, a soldier in her natural state, working calmly in chaos. He tapped the comm on his collar. Chief Quinn, keep an eye on Harper. If anyone asks, she's under protective detail. Yes, sir, Quinn's voice came back, low but certain. I've got her 6. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the Sierra Ridge, the sky turned the color of rust. Evelyn sat on the back steps of the workshop, mug of coffee steaming in her hands. Jack Monroe joined her, his shoulder still bandaged from the ambush. They say we're grounded until further notice, he said. No missions, no patrols. You really shook the hornet's nest. Evelyn gave a quiet chuckle. Wouldn't be the first time. Jack studied her face. You ever get tired of being the ghost who fixes everyone else's mess? She looked out toward the snow-blind mountains. Tired? No, just old enough to know the difference between revenge and redemption. Captain Drake approached, her breath visible in the cold. Harper, she said, holding out a tablet, I think you should see this. The screen displayed a single message in all caps. Widow's Breath Protocol reactivated. Clearance level red. Evelyn frowned. Where did this come from? Intercepted off a CIA satellite relay 3 hours ago, Drake said. It's addressed to Raven 9. Evelyn's thumb hesitated over the screen.
Too much blood.
She hadn't seen that codename in almost a decade. They're calling you back, Drake continued. They think you're still active. I'm not, Evelyn said flatly. They don't seem to agree. Inside her jacket pocket, Evelyn's hands shook just slightly. The tremor wasn't fear. It was muscle memory. The body remembering things the mind tried to forget. Fallujah, the sandstorm, the radio call that never came. The ghosts she'd buried under layers of grease and coffee grounds were stirring again. Who's behind it? She asked finally. Drake's voice softened. Whoever ordered the ambush wants to tie up loose ends. If you're alive, you're a liability. Evelyn looked up at her. Then I'll make myself useful before they erase me. That night, the base fell under lockdown. Soldiers were confined to quarters, comms restricted, but Evelyn was already in motion. She'd spent 2 years learning every inch of Fort Silas, every blind spot, every unregistered maintenance route. By 0200 hours, she was in the restricted data vault, fingers flying over a terminal she wasn't supposed to access. Lines of code scrolled across the screen, transmissions, coordinates, hidden accounts. The Widow's Breath wasn't a single mission, it was a system. A black network buried inside the defense budget, feeding information to contractors who profited from endless wars. Gotcha, she whispered. The door creaked. Evelyn spun, Glock raised. It was Jack Monroe. He froze, hands up. Easy, he said. Beckett told me to keep you safe, not to die for it. You shouldn't be here, she warned. Neither should you. He glanced at the screen. What is this? Proof, she said, of who's really been pulling the strings. Then let's take it to the colonel. Evelyn shook her head. We take this to the colonel, and he'll be forced to report it. Once it hits the chain of command, it disappears. We'll vanish with it. So what's the plan? Jack asked. She ejected a drive, slipped it into her pocket. We go off-grid, find whoever's running this operation, cut it at the source. As they exited the vault, floodlights burst on. Hands where I can see them, shouted a voice. 2 MPs blocked the hall, weapons raised. Behind them stood Colonel Beckett himself. His eyes met Evelyn's, unreadable. You were told to stay put, he said evenly. And you were told your son's unit died for nothing, Evelyn shot back. The air went still. Even the MPs hesitated. Beckett walked forward slowly. You found something. Yes, she said. A network that's still killing people to cover up what they started 9 years ago. Briggs was just a pawn. The real traitors are in Washington. Beckett exhaled, the weight of his command pressing down. You think I don't know what DC does to keep itself clean? But you go public with this, they'll bury you twice. Evelyn met his gaze. Maybe. But if I keep quiet, they'll bury more of your sons. The colonel stared at her for a long time, then nodded once. You'll need a head start. He turned to the MPs. Escort Sergeant Monroe back to quarters. Miss Harper's under my direct orders now. She's leaving on assignment. Jack's eyes widened. Sir, with respect, that's an order, son. Evelyn and Beckett walked together to the airstrip. The wind screamed across the tarmac. He handed her a sealed envelope stamped with a black raven. This came for you an hour ago. CIA courier. It doesn't officially exist. Evelyn took it. What's inside? Coordinates. Kashmir border region. They're calling it the Phoenix Relay. Another battlefield. Maybe the last one you'll ever walk into. She zipped up her jacket, the faded emblem catching the light. Then it's fitting, she said. Ravens always return to where the blood was spilled. Beckett gave a sad half-smile. You sure you want to go back to being Raven 9? Evelyn looked toward the dark ridge rising against the stars. I never stopped being her. I just tried to forget. As the small transport plane lifted off, the base lights below faded to pinpricks. Beckett watched until the horizon swallowed it whole. Then he turned to Chief Quinn beside him. If she comes back, he said quietly, make sure she has a place to land. Quinn nodded. She always does, sir, right here on Iron Ridge. And far above the sleeping mountains, Evelyn Harper opened the envelope, her fingers steady at last. Inside was a single line of text. Phoenix protocol activated. Raven needed. 72 hours. She leaned back, closing her eyes as the engines droned. Somewhere beneath the noise, she could almost hear the voices of her old team, the ghosts who'd never left her. This time, she wasn't running from them. She was flying toward them. The plane banked east, and the Rockies gave way to endless darkness. Then dawn unspooled over foreign mountains that looked older than memory. By the time the tires kissed, a short strip outside lay. The wind coming off the Himalayas felt like a blade. Evelyn Harper stepped down with a borrowed duffel and the practiced anonymity of a woman who had learned to be no one in a hurry. The air here was thinner, cleaner, the kind that empties your lungs just to remind you they're yours. She tasted dust and cold metal and something else beneath it, old fear, the kind that clings to places that have seen too much. Her contact waited in a battered gypsy jeep, visor low, scarf higher. You're late, the driver said without turning. You're early, Evelyn answered, sliding in. A brief silence. Then the driver smiled under the scarf and pulled away. Captain Anika Bose, she said, technically customs enforcement, practically whatever keeps the peace. Her hands were small but decisive on the wheel. Her eyes never stopped moving. They drove without chatter, the road a ribbon carved into stone. Satellite dishes sprouted like thistles from roofs of mud brick. Somewhere, a prayer flag snapped in the wind, its colors gone to ghost. Phoenix Relay? Evelyn asked. Bose nodded toward a slate valley rimmed by radio towers. An old telemetry farm, the Soviets abandoned. Someone repurposed the bones fiber in the ground, microwave link across the ridge, power from a micro-hydro line. Looks like weather sensors on paper, moves money and people in practice. She handed over a folder as they bounced across a culvert. Inside were photos in cold daylight, a steel door with a painted number, 2 men with contractor haircuts and the posture of people who trust the cameras they own, not the laws they don't. On the back of one page, Bose had scrawled 2 names, Dana Kroll and Marcus Ellery. Front company called Red Meridian Logistics, Bose said. Registered in Delaware, floated through 3 shell firms in the Caymans. Same paperwork DNA as the outfit your Captain Drake traced. Evelyn let the papers rest on her lap and watched the mountain throw shadows across their path. Who protects them? Everyone, Bose said, and smiled without humor. That's why you're here. They parked in the lee of an old Chorton and finished the ascent on foot. The relay compound clung to the slope like a barnacle low, ugly, sure of itself. Evelyn studied it through a pair of civilian binoculars whose paint had been rubbed down to raw metal. No guard rotations, because the cameras did their thinking. No outer fence, because the cliff did their threatening. What the site had in redundancy, it lacked in imagination. She traced the microwave dish's sightline with a fingertip, then the hydro intake half a kilometer up. They built for uptime, she murmured, not for ghosts. Bose handed over a scarf and a coil of insulated wire. What does a ghost do? Turns the lights off, Evelyn said, and began to climb. The hydro line was a silver vein threading through stone. She reached the gatehouse, cracked the rusted lock with 2 twists and an insult, and crouched in the wet hiss of the intake. She counted under her breath, 4 in, 7 hold, 8 out, then bridged 2 terminals with the wire. The turbine coughed, the line stuttered, the compound below blinked. She let the cycle recover, waited 14 seconds, broke it again. A rhythm as old as a prayer and as precise as a metronome. Inside the relay, predictable things happened. Servers screamed as UPS units kicked in, cameras dropped to low resolution, the microwave backhaul throttled. Predictable men swore. Predictable routines exposed seams. Evelyn and Bose were already moving, slipping into the service trench while the status board fought its own panic. They emerged under a deck congested with cable trays. Evelyn popped a junction panel with a dull blade and slid a thumb-sized device into an RJ45 slot. A hardware implant, ugly and stubborn, the kind you can't fix with a patch because it isn't software. It would mirror traffic to a satellite window stitched from the same clearance that had called her across the world. They spent exactly 11 minutes inside the length of time a proud engineer believes in his redundancy before he calls a contractor. On the way out, Bose paused by a door marked weather calibration. Through the glass pane, a woman with clipped blonde hair, Dana Kroll, argued into a headset, gesturing at a screen filled with transfer queues. A name floated on one of the queues long enough for Evelyn to see it. Ellery Capital Partners ADG, divided by Ops Widow Fund. Her mouth went dry. They didn't even bother to rename the money, she whispered. Back at the Jeep, Bose drove like a rumor. The wind pushed at them with both hands. Your implant? How long until it sings? It's already singing, Evelyn said. We'll get routing tables, SSH keys, voice packets, if they're sloppy. Then we find the head. Bose glanced over. And if the head is in D.C.? Then the mountain moves to Washington, Evelyn said, and felt the calm that comes when the path narrows and stops pretending to fork. They worked from a safe flat above the town, where a rooftop water tank cut the wind and laundry lines braided the sky. Night fell in hard stripes. Evelyn hunched over a rugged laptop, headphones on, the screen bleeding green code into her face. Packets mirrored, decrypted, mapped. A little contraband math did what official channels wouldn't. She heard voices riding the wire. Ellery, smooth and tired. Kroll, impatient. A third man, American vowels worn down by boarding schools. He used a courtesy that felt like a weapon. Contain the Iron Ridge narrative, he said. Acquisition will proceed after the Prague handoff. If Raven surfaces again, we convert or we close. Evelyn paused the capture and replayed 3 syllables. The man let slip when he thought no one was listening. Undersecretary, Halverson. The name hung in the cold like a flare. She didn't look at Bose. She didn't need to. They both understood what a title that high meant. The Black Network hadn't survived the years. It had been invited back inside. They slept in shifts. At dawn, prayer bells rolled down the slope, soft as cloth. Evelyn brewed tea on a camp stove that had seen other wars. Her hands shook only once when she lit the match. You could send this to your colonel, Bose said, watching steam spool from the tin cup. He'd have to act. He would, Evelyn said. They won't let him. She thought of Beckett's son's letter folded like a scar, and the anger arrived, clean, useful. So we make it public and survivable at the same time. By noon, the implant had done its work. She had the relay's internal ledger wallet addresses that danced in cycles across exchanges, invoices for weather calibration that hid payments to fixers in Karachi and lawyers in Arlington. Most of all, she had a voice print on Halverson good enough to cut into committee if a journalist ever dared. She wrapped the data the way you wrap a wound. Layers, pressure, a note on top for the next pair of hands. The package went 3 ways at once, one to Captain Drake, one to an old friend at a paper who had once traded her silence for a life she couldn't save, one to a dead drop whose existence meant the CIA still had people who remembered the difference between legal and right. They were breaking the stove down when the first truck crested the road below. Then a second, both white, both with the swagger of property that expects to be obeyed. Bose didn't curse. She smiled, small and delighted, like a teacher who has been handed proof of her hypothesis. We tripped them, she said. We wanted to, Evelyn replied, already moving. They didn't run. They changed floors, changed shadows, changed the angle of what the trucks could see. Men poured out fast contractor, black, pocket radios, the blank focus of well-paid worry. Evelyn counted breaths. 4 in, 7 hold, 8 out. She didn't reach for a rifle, she reached for wires. The power to the stairwell, the breaker feeding the outside cameras, the innocuous bell that, with the right splice, became a shriek in a dozen directions at once. Confusion is a weapon older than bullets. The men split, then split again, chasing echoes. When one finally found the roof, he found no one, and said so, in a voice Evelyn captured with her phone, filed under proof men with guns on civilian roofs. They made the alley by stepping through laundry and apology. A woman peeling potatoes on a stoop didn't look up. A child banged a stick against a tire with the authority of kings. Bose drove without sound, hands light. 20 minutes later, they were out on the road that runs like a question along the Indus. The relay compound shrank to a dot. At the checkpoint leaving the valley, a soldier with chapped lips waved them down, then waved them through after seeing Bose's badge. He leaned in as if to ask for a cigarette, then thought better of it. The mountains opened. The sky decided to be blue. Evelyn rested her head against the cold window and let the ache in her knees report what the years had done. Her phone vibrated once in her pocket, the old encrypted channel, the one that never rang unless the world tilted. She read the message and felt something unclench in her chest. Phoenix relay disrupted. Devdesmit 3's lives saved. Package received. Another line followed, slower to arrive, as if some human hand had insisted on typing it instead of letting the system speak. Raven, come home. Home is a generous word. Sometimes it's a base on a ridge where a colonel leaves a light on. Sometimes it's a workshop that smells like oil and forgiveness. Sometimes it's a place that no longer exists, except in the muscle memory of someone who refuses to stop counting. Evelyn slid the phone away and watched the river choose its path around rock after rock, patient as time. "You'll go back?" Bose asked. Evelyn considered the question the way a sniper considers wind. "I'll go where the next pattern leads," she said, "but I'll send the coffee first." They reached the airstrip at dusk. The pilot looked at the horizon the way pilots do when weather and orders disagree. Evelyn climbed the step, then stopped and turned to Bose. "If you ever need a ghost," she said, "there's a ridge in Colorado where they still know my name." Bose saluted with 2 fingers and an irreverent grin. "Next time," she said, "bring better tea." The plane lifted, and the valley fell away, and the world reorganized itself into lines on a map. Somewhere far behind, servers blinked and then went quiet. Somewhere ahead, a city of marble offices and polite threats waited for the sound a truth makes when it lands in a room that thought it was soundproof. Evelyn closed her eyes and let 14 seconds pass, then 14 more, until the rhythm felt like prayer again. Heroes save heroes, she thought. Sometimes with rifles, sometimes with wires, always with time. The plane slid into Andrews under a sky the color of paper, and by the time Evelyn Harper crossed the Potomac inside a nondescript sedan with a diplomatic plate, Washington had already begun to do what Washington does spin. In one corner of town, a committee aide rehearsed questions into a mirror, jaw tight, tie tighter. In another, a public affairs officer drafted a sentence designed to say nothing in 15 words. And in a high floor of a glass building on K Street, Marcus Ellery stared at an email that should not have existed. Voice print, ledger fragments, the 2 words that make even professionals sit down authenticated chain. He closed his eyes, opened them, and dialed a number that never rang twice. "Undersecretary Halvorsen isn't available," a voice said smoothly. "Then tell him this. The ghost brought a mirror." The line went dead, which was answer enough. Evelyn didn't head for the Capitol or a safe house. She took the long way circling DuPont, cutting through alleys that smelled of wet cardboard and old conversations until she reached a newsroom that had outlived 3 owners and 1 revolution in how truth is sold. On the 4th floor, a woman with gray at her temples and ink on her fingers looked up and didn't smile. "You owe me 2 lives and a headline," she said. "I brought you something heavier," Evelyn replied, setting down a drive that could tilt a country by an inch and still be called balance. The editor, Lydia Morrow, plugged it in, scanned, swore softly. "You stitched the spine for me." "It needed to stand on its own," Evelyn said. "Triplicate corroboration, salted timestamps, off-site escrow. If they kill the story, it resurrects in 12 places. If they kill you, it sings at funerals." Morrow didn't look up. "If they kill you?" "They'll have to find me," Evelyn said, and for the first time that day she allowed herself a small, tired smile. On a hill, 3 time zones away, Fort Silas drank its morning coffee like communion. Colonel Thomas Beckett walked the motor bay in a silence his troops didn't interrupt. Chief Marlene Quinn checked the angle of a camera and the angle of the sun with equal suspicion. Jack Monroe stacked brake rotors because his hands needed weight. Captain Fiona Drake had been awake for 22 hours, tracing calls that curled back on themselves like snakes. When her secure line finally chirped, she answered before the second note. "Drake, it's Morrow," the editor said. "We're running it at 5. Names, dates, relay architecture, finance skeleton, the whole necropolis. If your colonel wants a comment, he has until 4:58. Drake closed her eyes just long enough to feel the relief and the risk cancel each other out. "We'll be ready." They weren't ready. Nobody is. Not for the moment when marble pretends to be flesh. At 5:07 p.m., the story went live. By 5:11, a junior staffer in Halverson's office was asked to step out for coffee and never came back. At 5:23, a memo drafted itself in a dozen inboxes explaining that complex programs require complex oversight and that any irregularities were the natural byproduct of courage. At 5:38, a convoy with tinted windows slid into an underground garage near Foggy Bottom. And at 5:46, as dusk turned the mall to a postcard, a mid-level scheduler moved a meeting on a calendar named Personal from tomorrow to yesterday, Washington's way of erasing footsteps. Morrow's newsroom phone rang until it became part of the air. Threats arrived in the language of polite society. Consider alternatives. This could damage your reputation. Think of the national interest. She recorded each one and fed them into a folder labeled Etiquette of Pressure. When a lawyer from Ellery Capital offered contrition in exchange for delay, she responded with what the best reporters keep in their top drawer. "We'll print your contrition on page A1. Evelyn watched from a chair in the corner. A shadow inside a shadow. She wasn't here to celebrate. She was here to listen to reverberations, to the particular silence that falls when a city realizes it has been caught. Somewhere behind that silence, she could already hear the counterpunch forming, character assassination, chain of custody doubts, an independent review, led by dependence itself. She texted Drake 2 words, Phase 2. At Fort Silas, Phase 2 looked like sandbags that no one named. Drake flipped the base into a posture that read merely prudent from the highway, but spelled we know to anyone who'd ever studied a map for angles of approach. Patrols doubled at the perimeter. Not heavy enough to invite attention, but placed where a drone couldn't call it coincidence. Comms hopped frequencies along a pattern Evelyn had taught them unpredictable to outsiders, home to anyone who had learned to count in breaths. Quinn walked the barracks with a flashlight and a mother's menace. Beckett drafted a memo he didn't send, folded it into his pocket, and told Supply to check the locks on the fuel depot one more time. Just after midnight, the blowback stopped being theory. A spearfish slid into the logistics network disguised as a software patch. Liam Cho caught it in 37 seconds, quarantined it in 40, named it in 55. Widow fix. Cute, he said, and rewired the trap so anything that touched it would ping a burner server in Ballston. 10 minutes later, someone in a penthouse thought he was erasing a footprint and instead left a boot in wet cement. Drake smiled without warmth. "Hi, Marcus," she said to no one in particular. At 2:13, a black SUV with plates registered to a company that rented to companies took the unlit road toward the west fence. 2 men in contractor casual stepped out with bolt cutters and the kind of confidence that comes from never reading history. They met a beam of white light and Chief Quinn's voice, unamplified, unafraid. "You're trespassing on federal property," she said. "The next thing you cut will be your careers." The men hesitated exactly long enough for a camera to love them, then backed away, stung by something more corrosive than pepper documentation. By dawn, the Potomac had new currents. On the steps of a building whose columns exist to assure people that time flows forward, microphones bloomed. A senator with a good haircut demanded answers in a tone that suggested he already had them. A watchdog group filed a request for records they knew they would never receive. The word Halverson began to migrate from Slack jokes to front pages. The undersecretary himself appeared with the casualness of a practiced lie, leaned on phrases that survive every scandal, deeply concerned, rogue elements, full confidence. He said Raven as if it were a metaphor, Evelyn, watching from Morrow's office, counted 14 seconds and whispered, "It isn't." Ellery didn't go on television. He went to ground, which for men like him means floors below parking, rooms with water that never tastes quite right, lights that hum like insects. Dana Kroll didn't go anywhere. She sat at the relay's sister site in Prague, watching circuits blink and not blink, and wondered if loyalty was just a nicer word for fear. On her screen, a message arrived that did not route through any system she owned, a brass casing rotating slowly in perfect HD, numbers scratched on its base 19. No words. She understood anyway. Some debts are paid in advance, some are paid by stopping. She reached for the power toggle and kept her hand there for a long time. Back in Colorado, Beckett assembled the base in the hangar, the morning cold shouldering in through the doors. He looked older than yesterday and more alive. "You've read the headlines," he said. "Read them again, then forget the noise and remember the truth. We serve people, not programs, law, not convenience, and each other above all." He paused and folded something small into his palm, the letter his son had written years ago. "If anyone asks you what Fort Silas stands for, tell them this: we keep faith." The hangar didn't cheer. It didn't need to. The sound it made instead was quieter and stronger, the collective scrape of boots turning back to work. Jack Monroe found Drake by the motor bay door, watching her breath drift. "You think they'll come straight at us again?" he asked. "They'll come sideways," she said. "Sabotage a generator, file an injunction, send a camera crew to ask why we're paranoid. They'll make the country choose between an easy story and a hard truth. And we make it impossible to choose wrong." She looked past him into the bay, where a single mug waited beside the machine, as if an absent hand had just left it there. "We do it the way she taught us." Evelyn left Washington the way she'd arrived, as a roomer with luggage. Before she crossed the river, she stopped once, on a sidewalk of stone that had listened to every kind of promise a republic can make to itself. She took out her phone and typed 3 messages. Tomorrow, if they smear the dead, run the letters. To Drake, watch the fuel trucks and the lawyers. To Beckett, coffee for 3 days in the cabinet by the bay door, 2 scoops per pot. She almost wrote, "I'm sorry," and didn't, because sorrow is a bridge too far and not far enough. She wrote "Heroes save heroes" instead and hit send. As the train shouldered south, Washington receded into a geometry of power, neat from a distance, broken up close. Evelyn let herself sleep in increments of 14 seconds, the body's old metronome finding purchase even in the rattling of steel. When she woke, the fields outside were copper and the sun was honest. Somewhere behind her, a man with a title rehearsed a better denial. Somewhere ahead, a base on a ridge checked its locks and its conscience. The marble had been named, the mountain was still itself. And between them, moving like weather, the widow of Iron Ridge counted breaths and waited for the next pattern to show its seams. The first strike didn't sound like an attack. It sounded like paperwork. At 1710, a courier in a pressed suit delivered an injunction so heavy with seals it might have stopped a bullet. The order named Fort Silas, Colonel Thomas Beckett, Captain Fiona Drake, and by some sorcery of misdirection, a civilian contractor of interest, as parties to an alleged misappropriation of federal signals property. Drake read it once, twice, a third time, and felt the trap purr. Comply and quarantine your comms for external audit. Resist and confirm the story that you have something to hide. She glanced at the clock. 5 hours until midnight. Somewhere in D.C. Someone had measured them to the minute. The second strike came on schedule and without drama. At 19, the West generator coughed, stuttered, and died failure signature too clean to be random. The hangar lights dimmed, the motor bay fell to a gray that made men look like rumors. Chief Marlene Quinn already had her sleeves rolled and a headlamp biting a white spear into the dark. She knelt by the control cabinet, thumb pressed to the reset, listening not to the generator but to the wind leaking under the door. "West intake screen," she said calmly, "packed with plastic ribbons. Somebody fed it confetti." The third strike arrived, smiling for the camera. At 2040, a TV van rolled up with the brakes of a pilgrim and a microphone flocked in the hands of a woman who could frost a senator and make him thank her for weather. "Colonel Beckett," she began, practicing sympathy like a martial art, "we're here to help you clear your name. A quick word about the alleged rogue operation known as," she let the word hang, "Widow." The base gates held. but the lens was a kind of breach, too. Drake felt the old itch between her shoulder blades targeting reticle, invisible but precise. Beckett gathered the command team in the dim of the ops room, half the screens dark, the others running lean as if embarrassed by their own glow. "We handle all three," he said, voice steady. "By the book, and by the book we wrote for nights like this." That book didn't sit on a shelf. It lived in muscle memory and quiet habits. It was the invisible map Evelyn Harper had left behind. A routing plan scribbled in grease pencil under a workbench. A comms dance taught as a joke and remembered as doctrine. A list titled, "Assume the obvious fails, then what?" "Legal first," Drake said. "If we accept the injunction, they sandbox our comms, including the hop pattern Evelyn built. If we refuse, they paint us as unaccountable." Quinn leaned over the table, knuckles scarred, wedding band old and unshiny. "Split the difference. Comply to the letter, not the spirit." Drake nodded, catching the rhythm. "We mirror the entire comms, stack to a physically right-lock drive and courier a forensic snapshot to the judge's clerk chain of custody, stamps, the whole cathedral. Meanwhile, we keep the mission net live on the breath count." She wrote the pattern on a notepad only to tear it off and pocket it. 4784 seconds live, 7 seconds dark, 8 seconds hop. Anyone outside would hear static. Insiders would hear a heartbeat. "Power," Beckett said. Quinn was already moving. She sent Jack Monroe and Liam Cho to the west intake with bolt cutters, a laundry bag, and patience. The ribbons were knotted from spools, slick plastic meant to cling, to suffocate airflow without looking like sabotage. Jack worked in silence, breath fogging the mesh, counting 1 ribbon, 2, 3, until the pile at his feet looked like the aftermath of a parade thrown by ghosts. "Spin it," Quinn radioed. Liam tapped the starter with the tenderness of a mechanic blessing an old friend. The generator coughed, then surged, the hangar lights brightening as if someone had remembered the word for morning. Quinn stood with her hands on her hips and looked, for a second, like the patron saint of stubborn machines. "Media," Beckett said last, the word carrying the weight of the first two. The van idled with its mast up, the reporter framed by her own lights, ready to turn any silence into guilt. Drake stepped to the line without a podium, coat unbuttoned, throat bare to the cold. "We will comply with any lawful order," she said, eyes steady, voice quiet enough to force the microphones closer. "We will not endanger ongoing operations by discussing classified patterns on live television. We are investigating sabotage of our power systems. We have invited federal marshals to observe our chain of custody procedures tonight. And I will say one thing more, because it is the only thing that matters. This base keeps faith. Ask our wounded. Ask their families. Ask the mountain." The camera blinked. For a moment, the reporter's arsenal pivot, interruption, strategic doubt found no purchase. She nodded and lowered the mic, just slightly. The concession of a pro who recognizes a statement that will play better uncut than poked. By 22:15, the injunction had a cousin, a voluntary request from a friendly subcommittee for immediate testimony by video link. Drake sent back a single page. "Fort Silas will comply at 9 local under council. The base is currently under emergency power remediation and external observation." It said nothing about the second net alive and breathing under the official one, or the marshals already inside, or the quiet circle of NCOs who had taken Evelyn's Maxim and made it operational. Protect the unglamorous lines first. The kitchen gas feed, the water pumps, the little warehouse with 1,000 O-rings and not enough forklifts. At 23:04, Quinn found the second failure. Not mechanical, human. The fuel ledger showed a phantom truck logged at dusk plate number that belonged to a school bus in Pueblo. Signature that looked like Beckett's until you looked at the way the K pretended not to be left-handed. "They'll try the depot next," she said. Beckett gave a single nod and headed that way himself. No sirens, no drama, just a colonel with a flashlight and a key that turned like a promise. He and the night watch opened the pumps, ran the pressures, took a sample, clean. Not because the enemy hadn't tried, Quinn thought grimly, but because Evelyn had insisted on steel caps that forced the filler to flow without reflux. "Every safeguard we keep looks paranoid," Evelyn had told her once. "Until the night, it looks like foresight." Midnight arrived the way snow does quiet, absolute. The base exhaled as one organism. Lights steady, nets humming, heaters dutiful, the mess hall radiating a domestic heat that argued with the wind. Drake sat on the stair to the mezzanine, back against the railing, and read Lydia Morrow's follow-ups on her phone. Ellery was silent. Halverson had switched from confidence to concern. The Prague switch had gone dark in a way that no metaphor could soften. Under the story, a comment with no picture and an old soldier's grammar read, 14 seconds is a prayer, ma'am, not a tick. Drake smiled, small and involuntary. Somewhere, Evelyn's gospel had found a congregation. The blow that should have broken them came at 0:37, not as force, but as doubt. A packet burst hit the mirrored drive they had sealed for the court, an attempt to poison their own evidence, to leave fingerprints that looked like theirs. Cho's alarm went off like a kettle, and he was already at the console, fingers dancing. They're trying to write to a drive with Write Protect tape on it, he said, half laughing. May as well try to autograph a photograph through glass. Drake ordered a photo of the seal, timestamp, 2 witnesses, a printed hash, another copy off-site, chain of custody as liturgy, proof as a ritual strong enough to outpray the lie. At 1:10, the TV van left. At 1:22, the marshals signed the logbook. At 1:30, the West generator purred with the self-esteem of a machine that has just been chosen. The wind off Iron Ridge slackened and swung, changing its mind about the weather. In the motor bay, Jack brewed coffee badly on purpose and then better on principle, measuring 2 scoops like a sacrament. He set a mug on the workbench and another beside the machine, leaving space where a pair of scarred hands should be. We held, he said quietly to no one and to the room itself. We held, Eve. Quinn did one last walk, touching doors like a nurse checking pulses. On the far wall, a laminated card hung from a nail, scuffed and greasy and more valuable than doctrine. It was the invisible map Evelyn had made of the baselines and arrows and jokey notes that decoded, in crisis, into a choreography of care. Quinn traced a finger along a penciled curve that led from the generator room to the kitchen to the water plant and finally to the motor bay. Protect the places that look ordinary, Evelyn had written in the margin. They are where the miracle lives. Toward dawn, with the east just beginning to untie the night, Drake stepped outside alone. The ridge wore a thin crown of frost. She counted 4, 7, 8, breathing a rhythm she didn't know her body had learned. Her phone buzzed once. A message from an unlisted number turned the screen into a small, warm square. Phase 3. Hold the line. Coffee for 3 days. Heroes save heroes. M. Drake typed nothing back because there was nothing to add. She slid the phone into her pocket and stood until the first light touched the hangar doors. When the sun finally shouldered over Iron Ridge, Fort Silas looked exactly the same to anyone who didn't know how to see. Trucks parked straight, antennas bored holes in the cold sky. A flag licked the wind and decided it would fly. But inside the wire, people moved with a new certainty, an earned quiet. They had survived the longest night, not by being louder or harder, but by being faithful to an invisible map written in grease and patience and the stubborn belief that ordinary things, protected, become extraordinary. Morning didn't arrive so much as reveal what the night had protected. The ridge wore a thin ribbon of sunlight, the kind that makes frost pretend to be silver, and Fort Silas breathed like a chest unclenched. The mess crew banged pans with the cheerful defiance of survivors. The generators purred as if nothing had ever been asked of them. Captain Fiona Drake walked the corridor with a legal pad and a calm that had edges. "We go first," she told Colonel Thomas Beckett, handing him a 1-page plan. "No waiting to be investigated. We invite it, frame it, and fix it in the light." The counteroffensive began in the conference room with coffee that tasted like resolve. U.S. Marshals returned at 8:55. The base council patched in from Denver at 8:57. By 9, Drake had a camera pointed at a table covered in custody seals and evidence bags like a liturgy of receipts. "This is our comms mirror," she said, voice clean and slow. "Immutable hash here, notarized witness statements here, and per the court's order, a duplicate going by sealed courier to the clerk. Any subsequent discoveries will be measured against this record." She didn't have to say the quiet part that poison added later would glow under this kind of light. It was baked into the ceremony, a secular sacrament against forgery. Beckett followed with what he does best, plain words that carry weight. "Fort Silas will answer every lawful question," he said, meeting the marshal's eyes one by one. "We will not surrender operational safety to theatrics." and we will not allow the good names of our people, uniformed and civilian, to be collateral in another man's explanation. The marshals signed, stamped, nodded. The legal wheel clicked forward, slow and inevitable. In Washington, the wheel spun differently. Marcus Ellery woke to three certainties. The Prague note had vanished, the ledger fingerprint was public, and Undersecretary Halverson had stopped picking up. He tried the old play's plausible deniability with one hand, philanthropic contrition with the other, but the phones that mattered rang on desks that had already seen his name in print. He tried a newer one. He pushed money at a problem that wasn't financial. Two boutique firms took retainers and produced arguments like elegant smoke. The record is incomplete. The operators misinterpreted directives. The procurement anomalies reflect urgency, not malfeasance. Lydia Morrow printed one sentence from each and buried them under headlines that ate legalese for breakfast. By noon, Ellery made the desperate play of men who still believe in corridors. He walked into one sublevel, Marble pretending not to notice him, and offered a trade to a fixer whose cufflinks remembered other scandals. A soft landing, he called it. A foundation, a fellowship, a speech about lessons learned. The fixer read the room, this year, this scandal, and shook his head slowly, a man declining a drink he once would have ordered. You built a relay that paid for its own witnesses, he said. There's no soft landing for that. Ellery emerged, squinting, the daylight unkind, the city smaller than it had been for him yesterday. At 14:30, a convoy with federal plates and careful faces rolled through Fort Silas's gate. Office of the Inspector General, Defense Criminal Investigative Service, a U.S. attorney's assistant with a jaw like a stapler. Drake greeted them with a packet that weighed the same as truth and a tour that didn't flinch. She let them look at everything that mattered and nothing that could hurt a patrol in the field. They asked for Evelyn Harper. Not a party to these proceedings, Drake said evenly. Nor a defendant, nor a ghost we conjure for your cameras. She said it without spite, and the phrasing lodged like a pebble under a tongue, irritating, unforgettable. By late afternoon, the base had done all the right things loudly enough to be heard, and all the necessary things quietly enough to work. The sun tipped toward the ridge. Chief Marlene Quinn wiped her hands on a rag and put the rag in her pocket, the choreography of a woman who knows how ceremonies begin. Motor Bay, she told Beckett and Drake. 5 minutes. She didn't call it a ceremony. She didn't have to. They came the way soldiers come to things they don't want to name, in ones and twos, pretending to look for tools or to check on a job they'd already finished. Jack Monroe set up a folding table against the back wall and laid out 8 mugs, the thick ceramic kind Evelyn Harper swore made the brew sit right in the mouth. Liam Cho carried the dented kettle like a chalice, someone no one admitted who had chalked a small raven on the concrete near the drain. It would wash away. That was the point. Beckett didn't climb anything or clear his throat. He just stood where the hum of the bass could be heard and not explain itself. We lost a way of doing business yesterday, he said, and his voice found the rafters without forcing itself. Good. We didn't deserve to keep it. We kept something else, each other. He opened his palm. In it, a single brass casing, polished until the scratches gleamed. 19. I don't know what this will mean tomorrow. I know what it means today. He set it on the bench. The sound it made was small and round and absolute. Quinn spoke like a woman who has taught apprentices and held newborns and buried friends. Honor's not the ribbon, she said. It's the hands, the work, the coffee at 0400, the steel cap on a fuel neck that keeps a bad night from getting worse, the stubborn way we refuse to let ordinary things be neglected. She nodded at the generator room as if it were a person. We honor that. Drake could have spoken about protocols and subpoenas and the algebra of oversight, but instead she told a shorter story. When I first got here, she said, a woman I didn't understand adjusted a wrench in my hand and said, find the seam and then stop pushing. I didn't know what she meant. I do now. We found the seam. We stopped pushing only when the truth clicked into place. Jack poured. It was not good coffee. That wasn't the point. He measured 2 scoops per pot and said it out loud in case anyone had forgotten how to count the way Evelyn had taught them. 4 in, 7 hold, 8 out, the breath that turns jitter into steadiness, the ritual that makes skill repeatable under pressure. They lifted mugs. No toasts, no speeches. Just heat in cold hands and the kind of silence that keeps a room from lying to itself. A young specialist, Reina Salcedo, new to the motor pool, nervous in a way that has nothing to do with competence, cleared her throat. "Sir, Chief," she said, looking between Beckett and Quinn. What do we call this?" Beckett looked at the chalk raven, at the grease map taped by the door, at the bench where a single casing sat like punctuation. "Maintenance," he said. Quinn smiled, tired and whole. "An honor," Drake added almost to herself. "And witness." Salcedo nodded, shoulders squaring a fraction, a new shape in her spine where belief lives. Phones buzzed news alerts, subpoenas, op-eds with teeth, but the motor bay didn't break its shape. Beckett palmed the casing once more, and then put it back down exactly where it had been. Lydia Morrow's text arrived to Drake. "Halverson placed on administrative leave. Prague source confirms voluntary shutdown. Ellery Council shopping plea." Under that, a photo of a newsroom whiteboard where someone had written "Raven is not equal to myth" and underlined it until the marker squeaked. As people drifted back to tasks, Quinn caught Monroe at the door. "You'll take the late check on the fuel yard," she said. "Bring Salcedo. Teach her the stubborn way." Jack nodded. "2 scoops per pot," he said reflexively. "Always," Quinn replied, and for a second both of them saw Evelyn standing where the light falls worst, pointing to the place where a bolt goes from tight to true. The day after did what all days after do it, made lists. Repairs to schedule, briefings to prepare, lawyers to tolerate. But something quieter had changed, and it held. The base walked around with better posture, as if a hand on the shoulder had reminded it of where its bones were. When the sun scraped its last copper off the ridge and left blue in its place, a wind moved through the hangar that sounded like a page turning. Drake locked the ops room and stood a moment under the buzzing exit light, counting 4, 7, 8, until her breath matched the night. Her phone buzzed once with a number that never typed twice phase 4, teach. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. On the bench behind her, the brass casing caught the last light and returned it to the room. Not a medal, not a trophy. A reminder, a promise. The shape honor makes when it refuses to be a ceremony and insists on being work. They didn't frame it as doctrine or laminate it into a checklist. At Fort Silas, the truth never needed capital letters to work. It needed hands. So the codifying began the way engines are rebuilt piece by piece on a clean rag. Quiet, exact, with someone older watching the torque. By the end of the week, a pattern had emerged that everyone recognized without anyone voting on it, the base translating Evelyn Harper's habits into a curriculum you could feel in your wrists. They called the new block simply the map. Recruits walked it before dawn. The generator house first, warm breath of diesel on cold cheeks. The kitchen next, where water boils as steadily as morale. The little warehouse that holds gaskets and patience. The motor bay last. A chapel disguised as a workroom. Captain Fiona Drake taught the first cohort herself. She didn't lecture. She set a wrench in a corporal's palm and said, "Lesson 1, weight tells the truth." Then she watched comprehension arrive through bone rather than theory. Chief Marlene Quinn handled the second hour in the generator room where the floor hums like an animal at peace. "Lesson 2, she said, tapping the intake screen. "Protect the ordinary lines. Saboteurs go for cameras. Entropy eats hoses." Outside, the ridge wore a thin collar of frost. Inside, people learned to listen to machines the way snipers listen to wind. Jack Monroe took them out to the fuel yard at first light. He held up a steel cap. "Lesson 3, he said. "Small parts decide big nights." Reyna Salcedo shadowed him with a notebook she never showed anyone. Drake saw her counting on her fingers when she thought no one noticed 4, 7, 8, and let the counting be its own lesson. Word spread, not because it was broadcast, but because it was lived. Lesson 4. Chain of custody is a promise, not a performance. Drake ran the ceremony of evidence the way a medic runs triage, steady, humane, impossible to fake. They hashed mirrors, sealed bags, logged witnesses, and sent a courier with a hand-lettered tag that said simply, "Keep faith." Lesson 5. The second net. Liam Cho mapped the breath hop across a whiteboard, then erased it and had people tap it out with fingertips on the table until the room sounded like a heartbeat. "If the official channel gets poisoned, we breathe," he said. "If they jam us, we breathe again." Lesson 6 arrived in the kitchen at 0400 with 2 scoops per pot. Jack didn't romanticize it. Rituals keep units alive, he said, measuring in silence, especially the ones that seem beneath your rank. Lesson 7 hid in plain sight. Humility as security. Quinn made lieutenants inventory O-rings next to privates. You'll find the hole in the plan faster with a gasket in your pocket than with a speech in your mouth, she said. And no one argued, because the room was full of engines that had forgiven arrogance and punished it in equal measure. Lesson 8 took place under the flag at shift change. Beckett recited a paragraph he had rewritten 3 times in pencil and once in his blood. We serve law, not convenience, people, not programs, and each other, above all. No one clapped. A bolt clicked true somewhere in the building, and that was applause enough. Lesson 9 came as a story. Drake stood by the bay door and said, "Find the seam. Stop pushing when truth clicks. If you can't feel the click, you're forcing it." She placed a gloved hand on a recruit's wrist so he could feel the difference between tight and right. He never forgot. Lesson 10 was the breath itself, the 4-7-8 that moved through the base like a shared pulse. People learned it fixing belts, waiting for a judge to pick up, sitting in a dark room while a TV van outside rehearsed a question that wasn't really a question. The breath made jitter into steadiness, rage into aim. Lesson 11, the one no one wanted until they needed it. Witness. Lydia Morrow visited the hangar on a gray morning and spoke softly to a semicircle of uniforms about paper that outlives pressure. "Write down what you would sign in court," she said. "Date it. Keep a copy where no one thinks to look." She nodded at the grease map on the wall as if it were scripture. Lesson 12 couldn't be taught so much as caught. Heroes save heroes. Quinn wrote it small near the clock where people stare at minutes, only 3 words and a period, and left it there until the cleaning crew began to wipe around it like a relic. While the map became muscle, Washington tried to conclude itself. Undersecretary Halverson's leave hardened into resignation, the letter artful in its syntax and empty in its verbs. The Inspector General released an interim report whose adjectives made lawyers sigh with professional satisfaction: substantiated, corroborated, authenticated. Ellery surfaced in a courthouse corridor, not in cuffs but without a tie, which for his tribe is a louder confession. He pled to a count that sounded minor and wasn't the kind of wire that unspools when you tug it. Dana Kroll sat before a camera in Prague and said, "I shut it down exactly once." Then she turned the microphone off and went to rename what she did for a living. None of that felt like victory at Fort Silas. Victory doesn't feel like anything. It leaves you standing in a clean room with work still to do. The mailroom clerk found the package on a Thursday that smelled like snow. No return address. Weight of a paperback. He brought it to Drake because in weeks like these you bring anything you can't name to someone who can live without naming it for an hour. She cut the paper with a box knife, careful as surgery. Inside, a coil of insulated wire, a thumb-size hardware implant taped to an index card, and a battered journal bound in black cloth. No signature. Only 4 words on the first page in a hand that looked like someone who had been writing in the dark for years. For the places that look ordinary. Drake didn't cry. She set the wire on the table near the steel cap, the implant beside the custody seals, the journal where the grease map could see it. Then she called Quinn and Beckett and Monroe and Salcedo into the motor bay without explanation. They gathered the way people gather when a friend's name passes through a room like weather. Drake read aloud one page, the one about redundancy and mercy, about building with the assumption that memory fails and designing anyway for someone to remember. She closed the book. No speech. The room understood. That afternoon they added 2 small rituals. A recruit finishing the map touched the steel cap, and then the journal before signing the log. And on Friday's last thing, someone never the same person twice laid a single brass casing on the bench and polished away the week with a rag until the groove of 19 flashed like a quiet threat against complacency. The base kept moving. Lawsuits cooled into cases. Cases warmed into history. History did what it always does, forgot the wrong details, and clung to a handful that mattered. Fort Silas kept faith with bolts and breath and a map drawn in human stubbornness. On a wind-hollow night near the end of winter, Beckett stood alone under the hangar's exit sign, counting 4, 7, 8, while the generator purred and the coffee machine clicked. His phone buzzed once. No words this time, just a photo. A window of mountain night, a cup steaming on a sill, a raven stitched so faint you'd miss it unless you'd been taught to see. He didn't forward it. He didn't need to. He put his hand on the journal, left there so the next shift would find it exactly where it should be, and whispered the only doctrine the map ever needed. Protect the ordinary. The miracle lives there. Spring at Fort Silas always came sideways, half snow, half rumor, creeping through the seams of rock and metal like it was afraid to be caught. The mountains still looked carved from steel, but there were patches of stubborn green along the creek, and the air no longer smelled like diesel alone. The base worked in rhythms again. Morning drills, maintenance, briefings, and the quiet pulse of the map. What had once been habit was now culture. What had begun as survival had become belief. Yet there was still a space, a silence shaped like a woman who never stayed long enough for farewells. Colonel Thomas Beckett didn't expect the letter. No one sends mail anymore, at least not by hand, not from nowhere. But one morning in April, the sentry at the east gate brought him an envelope wrapped in brown paper. Edges damp from fog, postmarked from Wyoming, no return. The handwriting was small, deliberate, unhurried. Inside was a single sheet torn from a mechanic's logbook. Thomas, if the coffee tastes bitter, check the valve, not the beans. If the nights stretch too long, walk the ridge and count to 14 before deciding anything. The world moves faster now, but the patterns haven't changed. Someone will always trade conscience for convenience. Keep teaching them the difference. The mountains remember those who fix things instead of breaking them. I've gone to where fixing still matters. Don't send anyone. The map is yours now. E. The paper smelled faintly of gun oil and pine. Beckett folded it once and placed it inside the journal in the motor bay beside the 19 casing. He didn't show anyone, not yet. Some truths live better, whispered. Life didn't freeze after revelation. It ripened. Captain Fiona Drake was promoted but refused transfer, saying Fort Silas still had one war left, the slow one between cynicism and care. Chief Marlene Quinn turned the map lessons into a formal course titled Operational Maintenance and Moral Resilience, the first syllabus in the service to include both torque specifications and the ethics of silence. Jack Monroe led the morning classes, telling recruits that perfection wasn't the goal, continuity was. Reina Salcido, no longer nervous, taught the breathing drill to every new rotation and ended each session the same way. Heroes save heroes. Start small. The wider world moved on the way it always does when it realizes something without admitting it. Ellery's conviction became a line in a quarterly report. Halverson's resignation spawned a think tank seminar on oversight in dynamic environments. The story fell off front pages, but the question stayed, murmuring beneath headlines about other places, other ghosts. Lydia Morrow won an award she didn't attend. She mailed the plaque to the fort with a note, "For your wall, or your toolbox." They hung it crooked on purpose. Summer came clean and hard. The ridge bloomed with wildflowers the color of rust. On the anniversary of the Tangi ambush, Beckett gathered the base without orders. No speeches, just a line of mugs on the bench, each with 2 scoops per pot and a spoonful of memory. The coffee was terrible again, and perfect for it. Drake read the original maintenance log where Evelyn had first scribbled wind patterns. Quinn traced the grease lines like reading Braille for the blind gods of machinery. Monroe stood in the doorway, hat in hand, and said nothing until the silence felt full enough to hold the words. 14 seconds, he whispered, and the hangar breathed as one. That night, clouds built over the ridge, black on black, and the first thunder in months rolled through the valley. Beckett stood on the catwalk and watched lightning catch the fuel tanks for an instant of brightness that made the whole base look alive. He didn't flinch when a second flash revealed a silhouette near the old generator shed small, still, hair pulled tight against the wind. He blinked and it was gone. Later, the sentry swore he'd seen a figure at the east gate, leaving a thermos on the wall. "Old woman," he said. "Walked like she'd been here before." They found the thermos in the morning. Inside, still warm, was coffee strong enough to make a man honest, and taped to the lid was another note in that same patient hand. Heroes save heroes. Keep it brewing. They placed the thermos on the workbench next to the journal and the casing. Nobody called it an altar, but everyone stopped there once in a while, just to check the valve, smell the coffee, make sure the miracle still lived in the ordinary. Months later, a message arrived through official channels encrypted, untraceable, unsigned. It contained coordinates deep in the Hindu Kush and a single line of text, "Target extraction complete. 28 lives secured. Iron Ridge principles applied, Raven returning to nest. Drake printed it and took it to Beckett. He read it twice, folded it once, and smiled in that halfway he did when emotion outweighed rank. She never could stay retired, he said. No, Drake answered, but she taught us how to live like she did, quietly, precisely, and without needing applause. They stored the printout between the logbook pages. Outside, the mountains wore late summer haze like a secret. The motor bay buzzed with the hum of engines being coaxed back to life, the smell of oil and effort thick as faith. Somewhere, a new recruit cursed a stripped bolt. Quinn corrected his angle, Salcedo timed her breath, and the machine finally yielded. Beckett watched from the doorway, counted 4, 7, 8, and said to no one, "That's how she wins one wrench turn at a time." At sunset, the valley glowed copper. The flag hung heavy but certain. The ridge wind carried a faint scent of coffee and ozone, as if the sky itself remembered her. And for an instant, before the light shifted, the shimmer above the hangar looked exactly like a raven tracing lazy circles before vanishing into the cloud line. No bugle, no salutes, no legend, shouted down the wire, just the rhythm she left behind. 4 in, 7 hold, 8 out. Breath as map, work as prayer, ordinary as miracle. Somewhere far from any base, in a mountain village where radio towers hum like crickets, a woman with steel-gray hair and eyes the color of dusk pours 2 cups of coffee. She sets one by the window, watching the horizon. She doesn't wait for thanks. She counts 14 seconds, smiles, and whispers into the rising wind, "Heroes save heroes." And the wind carries it back across oceans, across deserts, across the ridge she once guarded, until it finds Fort Silas, where a single lamp still burns through the night.